Do you often find yourself in very stressful situations that overwhelm you? Maybe it's social gatherings or having uncomfortable situations. And it's not just stress, but these things may also bring up extreme anxiety inside of you. In this video, I break down a podcast episode of Huberman, where he talks about the stress response, how we should think about it, and also how you can deal with it in a better, more healthy way. So let's get right into it. The first important thing to understand is that your body don't distinguish between physiological or psychological stress. So the stress response is completely generalized. Listen to Andrew Huberman here.
Stressors can be psychological or they can be physical. Okay? If I put you outside on a cold day without a jacket for a very long time, that is stressful. If I have you prepare for too many exams at once and you can't balance it all with your sleep schedule and your other needs for comfort and well-being like food, rest, sleep, and social connection, that is stressful. So stress, and as I mentioned before, is generic. It doesn't distinguish between physical and emotional stress.
The next important thing is that stress does not shut down your body, but rather it activates certain things and systems in your body while deactivating others. As many of you may know and probably have experienced yourself, is that stress is closely linked to anxiety. One reason for that is that during the stress response, your heart rate gets activated much stronger. But let's listen to Andrew Huberman here.
So the stress response is two-pronged. It's a yes for certain things and it's a no, you may not right now for other things. So that's the key thing to understand about the stress response. That's why your heart speeds up. That's why you feel blood in certain organs and tissues of your body, but not in others. That's why your throat goes dry.
And yes, if this response is unwanted or goes hand in hand with massive anxiety for you, there are ways how you can deal with it in the moment when it happens. But we'll get to that at the end of this video. But for now, it's also important to understand that stress is not just bad. There are also many good aspects that it has. So let's get into when stress is good for you and when it is bad for you. Let's listen to this next clip.
Acute stress. When the stress response hits, that is good for your immune system. I know that might be a tough pill to swallow, but it's absolutely true. In fact, stress often comes in the form of bacterial or viral infection. And the stress response is in part organized to combat bacterial and viral infection.
And that goes back to what we said at the beginning of this video. The stress response is generalized. So short bursts of stress can actually be very good for your immune system. And not just for that, but for other things as well, as Andrew explains here.
Short-term stress is good because the dilation of the pupils, the changes in the optics of the eyes, the quickening of the heart rate, the sharpening of your cognition, and in fact, that short-term stress brings certain elements of the brain online that allow you to focus. Now, it narrows your focus. You're not good at seeing the so-called big picture, but it narrows your focus. It allows you to do these, what I call duration path outcome types of analysis. It allows you to evaluate your environment, evaluate what you need to do. It primes your whole system for better cognition. It primes your immune system to combat infection.
So short-term peaks of stress can be very beneficial for you. But of course, now that we understand that, we also need to understand that long-term or even chronic stress is very bad for you.
Long-term stress is bad. You do not want adrenaline up in your system for a very long time. In fact, ideally, you would have your stress go up various times throughout the day, but it would never stay elevated and it would never prevent you from getting a good night's sleep. We know that chronic stress, elevated stress, and especially in the so-called type A personalities, creates heart disease, leading killer in most every country, but in particular in the US. Because of the way that adrenaline impacts those blood vessels of constricting and some and dilating others, it's just that kind of hypertension, chronic hypertension is just bad. And so chronic stress truly is bad. I want to really make that clear.
Good. Now that we understand that long-term stress is definitely bad for you, but short-term stress can be very beneficial, let's have a look at how to deal with stress. While short-term stress can be good for you, Maybe it comes in a situation where you really don't need or want it. For example, when you have a presentation or you want to talk in a big group of people and then you get overwhelmed by stress and feel anxiety. What can you do in these very moments to deal with this response? Let's listen to what Andrew Huberman says here.
If you want to slow your heart rate down, so stress response hits, you want to slow your heart rate down. What you want to do is, again, capitalize on this relationship between the body, meaning the diaphragm, and the heart and the brain. Here's how it works. When you exhale, the diaphragm moves up, which makes the heart a little bit smaller. It actually gets a little more compact. Blood flows more quickly through that compact space, sort of like it's just a pipe getting smaller. The sinoatrial node registers that blood is going more quickly, sends a signal up to the brain, and the parasympathetic nervous system, some neurons in your brainstem, send a signal back to the heart to slow the heart down. So if you want to calm down quickly, you need to make your exhales longer and or more vigorous than your inhales.
We've all heard about taking deep breaths, but if you want to make it as effective as possible, make your exhales longer. This naturally activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which then in turn naturally calms you down, and the sympathetic nervous system gets deactivated. And this is physiological. That means it works for everyone, because that's just how our bodies work. 2 small exercises I give all of my clients also work by activating your calming nervous system. And maybe they can be helpful for you as well. One is to just start stretching. By just stretching, you naturally calm yourself down. And another one is to just voluntarily yawn. So just stretch and yawn and do that right now for a few seconds and just notice how you naturally start to feel calmer. But yeah, breathing is very effective as well. In fact, it's more effective. In this next clip, Andrew describes the breathing techniques that you can use for yourself.
When you're feeling stressed, you can do a double inhale, long exhale. Now, physiological sigh is the fastest hardwired way for us to eliminate this stressful response in our body quickly in real time.
I would also highly recommend that you test this technique for yourself right now, just so you strengthen the recall pathway. You have actually done it, and that makes it much easier to then do it when you find yourself in a stressful situation. If you want to find out more about why these things work, check out the full podcast episode. You can find the link down below in the description. But great, you can now deal with stress in the very moment when it happens and calm yourself down. But maybe it's not very convenient to do that in the particular situations, or maybe you just got overwhelmed and stressed out all the time by many things. So now let's have a look at how you can heighten your tolerance level for stress so that you can endure more and are basically not as stressed out by situations you used to be.
Placing oneself deliberately into a situation where our adrenaline is increased somewhat, not to the extreme, and then when we feel flooded with adrenaline, and normally we would panic, it's about cognitively, mentally, emotionally calming ourselves and being comfortable with that response in our body.
Yes, you want to deliberately put yourself in very stressful situations. And by doing it deliberately, it has a very positive effect on your brain and subconscious, especially if you consciously work on being comfortable in these situations. But how can you actually correctly do this? Let's listen to Andrew Huberman here.
You can bring your heart rate up. You could do this through an ice bath if that's your thing, or a cold shower, or cyclic oxygenation breathing, or you could sprint, or you could go hard on the bike. Whatever it is that brings your heart rate up. And then what you want to do is you want to actually try and calm the mind while your body is in this heightened state of activation. And the best way that I'm aware to do that, again, goes back to physiology, not psychology. When we are stressed, our pupils dilate. The effect of that pupil dilation is to create tunnel vision. It literally narrows our view of the visual world. We no longer see in panorama. And there's some other effects as well, but that's because the visual system through this cranial nerve system that I described before is tethered and is part of this autonomic nervous system. By deliberately dilating your gaze, meaning not moving your head and eyes around, but by deliberately going from tunnel vision to broader panoramic vision, literally seeing more of your environment all at once. You don't have to do what I'm doing, which is not blinking. You're welcome to blink. But it means deliberately dilating your gaze so that you can see yourself in the environment you're in. It creates a calming effect on the mind because it releases a particular circuit in the brainstem that's associated with alertness, aka stress. Now, this is very powerful. If you're running, for instance, and you're at max capacity or close to it, or you're kind of hitting like 80, 90% of maximum on the bike, and you dilate your gaze, what you'll find is the mind can relax while the body is in full output.
So yes, you don't have to put yourself in these stressful social situations that bring up anxiety and that you really do not want to deal with. You can also just do intense sport or cold exposure. Why? Because as we already established, the stress response, the stress system is generalized. It's not physical or psychological, it is generalized. Great, now that you know how to deal with short-term stress and how you can heighten your capacity for stress, there's one more thing we need to take a look at, which is how you can mitigate or deal with long-term or chronic stress. And as we already breached on, long-term stress can have detrimental effects on your overall well-being. It can be a precursor for depression, anxiety, or heart disease. If you want to find out more about that, again, watch the full podcast episode. But now let's listen to Andrew Huberman again.
First of all, there are going to be the things that don't surprise you, which is everyone knows getting regular exercise, getting good sleep, using real-time tools to try and tamp down the stress response, etc. That's all going to be really useful. The data really point to the fact that social connection and certain types of social connection in particular are what are going to mitigate or reduce long-term stress.
Yes, social connections can have a tremendously positive impact on you. But key here is not just that it's a social connection with another human, let's say, but that this connection brings you delight. Let's listen to this next clip.
You can have attachments to other people. Some of those can be romantic attachments. Those could be familial attachments that are non-romantic, friendship, pets, even attachments to things that just delight us. One of the things that really can mitigate against the long-term negative effects of chronic long-term stress isn't just having fun. We hear all this stuff. You need to play and have fun. That can be a little bit of a tough concept, especially for the hard-driving people or people that are stressed. But having a sense of delight, a sense of really enjoying something that you see and engage in, witness, or participate in, that is associated with the serotonin system. And certainly play is one of those things, social connection of various forms. Those are things to invest in.
I know there are some people who might say, I don't have friends, or I don't even want friends. And yes, I know maintaining friendships or social relationships is definitely investment and work. But the positive long-term effects are well documented and really tremendous. If you're not really antisocial or for some reason say, no, friendships are not for me, you can also just, for example, have a pet, as Andrew Huberman just explained, because it's about the connection that brings you delight, and a pet can also be amazing for that. One thing we did not talk about in this video is, where does stress even come from? Obviously, there are stressful situations in life, but I'm talking more about when you find yourself in a situation that is so stressful and overwhelming for you that it brings up anxiety, that you can barely breathe or maybe even get panic attacks. Where does that come from? Why is it such a strong response? Well, if that happens, maybe even regularly, it's a good sign that you probably have deeper subconscious wounds or childhood wounds attached to situations in your life. You can deal with that and you can resolve that as well, so that these situations are much less stressful. I talk more about where these situations come from, how that all works in the video right over there. So be sure to check it out.